Welcome back to another edition of the podcast, and today it is our Game Week 37 National League review. We're going to be reviewing every single fixture in the Vanarama National League that obviously was played yesterday. Of course, as always, I'm joined by Sam Collyer to do this. Sam, firstly, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Pleasure to be on as usual. Good little game week. So looking forward to getting to talk about it.
Yeah, a lot of key games. I suppose at this start of the season, this time of the season, I should say, there's always going to be a lot of key games, isn't there, that are going to kind of define a lot of the team seasons, perhaps. Of course, towards the top, we had a huge fixture, and I think for both sides, it wasn't a particularly good result for their chances of still being involved in the title race. But a bit of late drama as well. A little bit's changed towards the bottom as well, and there's certainly a lot to discuss tonight on this podcast. So without any further ado, let's get on with the first game then. And we're starting things off with a low scoring but a very important 1-0 Barnet victory over Dagenham. They certainly left it late. 90 plus 3 minutes, Lee Ndlovu managed to put the ball in the back of the net for the Bees to sustain a healthy gap between them and second place in the National League.
Yeah, I feel a bit bad for Dagenham, really. It looked like they were so close to getting that important result that might have maybe kicked on their season and Lewis Young's reign at the club as manager, but it wasn't to be. They just kind of, petered out a little bit at the end. Goal was somewhat of a goalkeeping error after actually having a really good game, Louis Jones did. So, it's a bit disheartening for him, but it's what Barnet have done all season, really. They've turned up when it matters, and they've got important goals and important moments. And Lee Ndlovu, especially since signing from Boreham Wood, having to replace the outgoing Kabamba, that's some big shoes to fill at Barnet. So to come in and kind of have the impact that he's had, that's nothing short of exceptional for them. And I'm sure Barnet aren't particularly, with all due respect to Nicky Kabamba, I'm sure they're not particularly missing him as much as they thought they would, because of the presence that Ndlovu's bring. It's a very, very important result for Barnet, especially seeing the results around the rest of the division. But it doesn't look good for Dagenham, that's for sure. They look like they're slowly edging towards that relegation zone, and it's kind of got that doom and gloom feel still around the club where you don't really know where the next win's going to come from. So yeah, it's very significant for both ends of the table, this result.
Yeah, you mentioned Lewis Jones, of course, had an excellent game up until that mistake late on. I don't know if you'd class it as a mistake. I think most people, you'd expect him to have saved that shot late on. But yeah, he had an excellent game overall for Dagenham. Probably the man of the match across the 90 minutes, I would say. 24 shots he had to face against Barnet. And he almost managed to keep a clean sheet and a vital point for Dagenham. Suppose for Dagenham, it's hard to look at the positives at the moment. It'll still be very raw. You've taken top of the league until the final minute or so of the game, and to not get anything out of it after defending for their lives and putting their body on the lines for 90 plus minutes, it must be just so frustrating that they didn't manage to hold on to that very important point. And I don't think it would have been a really important point in terms of just the actual point itself, just the confidence it would have given the side to be able to keep a side like Barnet out, because we've seen that they have tried to recruit in recent weeks. Michael Hector's come in, a high caliber centre half. He's played in the Championship before. I believe he might have even played in the Premier League at some point as well in his career. So, to have someone like that in the side, although he's aging, I suppose it has shown a slight bit of improvement. A clean sheet against Aldershot, and then, of course, a clean sheet on Saturday as well. Well, nearly a clean sheet, I should say, on Saturday.
Oh yeah, nearly. But no, yeah, it's Hector's a great signing, and they had to try and make an addition at the back, considering Tom Eastman's suspectedly out for the season now. That's a huge blow for them. Big senior centre back at the club. He's been that kind of leader at the back that they kind of crucially needed at times. But no, I think Hector's a great addition, and they've tried to add through the loan market in recent weeks with the likes of Lipalo B and Regan Clayton, Chris Francis, etc. It just doesn't quite seem to be clicking, and I feel like the atmosphere around the club's kind of deteriorating slowly. Whatever problems they have is, the fans are more than aware of it. And before when they had Strevens in charge, it was more so that they were kind of just. I wouldn't say that he was punching above their weight, of course, because I feel like this team is more than capable of sitting up further in the table. But it does feel like a situation in which Strevens maybe masked some of the real problems at the club, and maybe did a bit of a better job than some people have kind of seen. But yeah, it's been a disaster of a start for Lewis Young as manager, if I'm being totally honest. I think that's no wins in his first 11 or it's 10 or 11. Yeah, as I say, it's an absolute disaster, really. And as I said, that relegation zone's looming closer and closer. And these kind of results where you lose the game last minute to Barnet. Although it's Barnet, the manner of the loss is going to play on the players' minds. And I believe they conceded last minute to Oldham as well, to end up drawing with them. That would have been a big 3 points for them to pick up. But the manner in which they lost that game or drew that game, that's going to play on the players' minds as well. So it doesn't look like a good situation for Dagenham at all. I do really worry for them, and something drastic's got to change if they want to stay in the National League this season.
Doesn't feel, if you actually look, and this was across the season, even under Strevens as well, they can see games out when they're actually winning as well. You go back to the Fylde game, they were winning that game. I believe in the reverse fixture against Barnet, I think they were 3-1 up against Barnet, yet still somehow lost. And there's been a number of games this season where they've been actually looking well on track to actually go and get all 3 points and somehow still don't get anything out of the game. Of course, this one, I think, just to get the point would have just given them so much confidence and momentum, going into the final 10 games or so for them. So for me, I look at Dagenham now, it is certainly concerning times. We could have been spoken about them very differently on this podcast this evening than what we have done in recent weeks. But it just feels like another game and another missed opportunity for Dagenham to get back to winning ways, because, certainly at the moment, the most out of form sides in the division. You looked at Solihull, they've managed to get a win now. For Dagenham, it's hard to see where this next result's going to come from, because, that it felt so close that they were going to get something out of that game. For you personally, then, it might be a stupid question. This, of course, we spoke about it a little bit, but do you think Lewis Wright needs to take a back seat and they need to bring someone else in to try keep Dagenham in the National League this season?
I mean, I'd say so. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say, how much of it is on him, and because obviously there's no hiding the fact that there is a few hiccups behind the scenes at Dagenham's in terms of maybe the people in charge and what the decision making that's going on. But yeah, I would say that in terms of when they sacked Strevens, I think all of the boxes they should have been looking to check in terms of hiring a new manager to help that team kick on and get the best out of them, I don't quite think Young ticks those boxes. I thought they would maybe look to add an experienced manager with some, maybe some promotion experience, someone who knows non-league. But instead they've gone and hired, the previous assistant coach. And it seemed a bit like almost the easy way out for them. So yeah, it's not particularly the appointment I thought they'd go for. And I do struggle to see how Young can turn this around. And I think the situation at Dagenham's, it's highlighted in this game alone, the fact that, Barnet have picked up 3 points here, and that is a huge 3 points for the title race. But the problems at Dagenham are so significant. We've sat here for 5 minutes now and spoke about purely them rather than how good Barnet were, because, it really stands out how big of a problem they have at the moment is.
As for Barnet, another game week, and they've got an even stronger grip on gaining automatic promotion this season after that victory over Dagenham. We speak obviously all the time about how you define champions and what are the signs of a side that's going to win the title. And I think games like this, for me, just show that this is a side that will go on to win the title this season. You look at the first half of the season for Barnet, for me personally, and you probably think that, I don't even think they got out of second gear for that first half of the season, and they've just got stronger and stronger as the season's gone on. I think they've invested as well in the squad. Of course, there's still talks about bringing a certain someone back to the club, but the things like Lee Ndlovu, that signing on paper when it first happened, for me personally, I thought, is that really the best replacement for Nicky Kabamba? But he fits the deal perfectly for Barnet, I believe. He offers them something different going forward. It's a side for me full of flair, full of athletes, and then you've got someone like Lee Ndlovu, who's just such a powerful and strong forward. that certainly offers something different and can change a game, which of course he did it in this game, and managed to get the winner for Barnet. And yeah, for Barnet now, of course, still sitting first, and they're currently 11 points clear at the top. So for me personally, yeah, they're certainly on track to win the league now. Moving on to the next game then, looking towards the bottom of the table now, we've got AFC Fylde 0, Braintree 2. Just 2 defeats in 11 now for Braintree. They're 7 points above the drop zone. This is certainly a good win for them, and certainly looking like they're going to be able to survive this season after this result.
Yeah, it's certainly significant, this result to the relegation fight. At the end of the day, Braintree, I feel like people realised at the start of the season that they built quite a strong squad, albeit quite a small squad. But they have that quality in that team, and the likes of Jermaine Francis and Cairo Lisby playing off of each flank. They scored both the goals at the weekend. It highlights just how how talented some of those players in that team are, and how they maybe shouldn't be where they are exactly. I know they've had a few issues financially throughout the season, and the squad maybe wasn't as bolstered as they would have liked. They've made a real statement there against Fylde, who are, they've picked up, I believe, Fylde have only picked up 1 point out of matches against Fylde, Boston, and there's 2 other teams down the bottom half of the table, down the relegation fight that they've that are included in that. Yeah, that's it. 1 point against the team surrounding them combined. It's not good reading for Fylde, and if they are to go down, that is, those significant results that are going to be the culprit of sending them down. But we speak about the same concept with Fylde every single week, really, on how they've got a strong squad, and they've got a group of players who maybe shouldn't be in the position that they're in. But that new manager bounce got them a few results. But now it's time for them to try and really kick on, and they've kind of put themselves on the back foot here. And in a game where they could have maybe gained some traction and drawn clear of that relegation zone a little bit, they've really put themselves right back in some problems, especially as a home fixture too. It's a bad loss for Fylde, but Braintree, they look a strong side, and like you said, I think they're probably a shoo-in for survival now.
Prior to that game, they had just 1 defeat in 5, and they had to play some very difficult teams during those 6 fixtures as well. Halifax away, they managed to go there, get a victory. Altrincham away, going and defeat them, and then of course getting a point against Gateshead, and even defeating a Hartlepool side as well, who up until recently was still involved with a chance of finishing inside the playoffs. And it just must be so frustrating as Fylde supporters. You look at these games where they're actually capable of defeating the so-called better sides in the division, yet they're slipping up against the sides that are around them in the table, who you'd like to think if they can compete with the better sides, they'll be able to beat these. Dropping points to Dagenham, I suppose. You look at Dagenham at the moment, you'd probably see that's quite a poor result for Fylde, particularly being at home. Losing to Boston at home as well, and then losing to Braintree as well. It just must be so frustrating for Fylde, because if they'd have beaten Braintree, it'd have been well in their hands to survive this season. They're still outside of the drop zone. But Wealdstone, of course, have a game in hand. Boston have 2 games in hand as well, so they could be back in an opportunity of being able to survive. And Fylde, it does feel like they've had opportunities this season to be able to kind of drift away from the relegation places, yet they just seem to keep missing these opportunities.
Yeah, it's like you said, I second that motion where suggesting the Fylde fans are going to be quite frustrated. It's that thought of what could be. That squad is more than capable of picking up results against this Braintree team, and picking up these results against the teams around them. But yeah, they just, for whatever reason, they just can't seem to get over that line. But like you said, it is getting really tight down there now. Even the likes of Maidenhead, they're known for escaping the drop every year. Wealdstone have a game in hand on them, as you said. It's really, if a team wants to stay up in this division now, it's getting to that moments in the season where you really need to try and make a statement, and you really need to try and put that run of games together that's going to keep you up, because you don't want to leave it late. You don't want to pile the pressure on. But with Fylde at the moment, it just seems like any time they try and gain that momentum, it just seems to kind of get ground to a halt. And this is a bad way for it to happen, especially considering that Braintree are a side that they'd be hoping to maybe catch this season if they want to secure safety in a comfortable manner. But credit to Braintree as well. They've really. I've been really impressed in recent weeks with how they've kind of dealt with their squad troubles. They only had 4 on the bench against Fylde. They've had more games this season than not where they've failed to fill a bench because of the lack of squad depth they have. But the additions of Aidan Francis-Clark and Jacob Pinnington, Henry Gray in goal, they've had to rotate and had to chop and change. But it seems like they finally found that consistency in the squad, and it feels like they finally found that strongest lineup and those players that they can really rely on. And you can see that in the results because they've got some consistency about them now. But like I said as well, the likes of Jermaine Francis, Cairo Lisby, they've got moments in them that can win you games, and at the weekend they did.
Speaking of Cairo Lisby as well, of course, he's up to 14 goals for the season after scoring against Fylde on Saturday. He's a player still very young himself, still only 21 years of age. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other National League clubs and even Football League clubs that will be keeping an eye on him for next season.
Yeah, he's a talent, and I think it's kind of gone unnoticed that he's made that jump from step 4 to step 1 with absolute ease. He was scoring for fun for Cray Valley last year, but to step up to a Braintree team who has struggled for large chunks of this season as well, and make this division look so comfortable at times. I'm sure that teams like in the EFL, looking at his age, his ability, all that combined, I'm sure EFL teams will be sniffing, and I'm sure Braintree will have to put a hell of an offer down to him in the summer if they want to try and keep him.
Moving on to the next game, then we're going to have a look at Aldershot versus Gateshead. Of course, the game finished 3-1 to Aldershot. Just a heads up for those who watched the preview show, this was one of the games that I got spot on, full 3 points for myself. I did predict 3-1 to Aldershot, and I think a lot of people actually saw this coming. Although you look at the table, you look at the differences between the two sides, you look at recent form and perhaps the injury issues that Gateshead have had and how Aldershot have, I suppose, strengthened in recent weeks. It didn't come as too much of a surprise that Aldershot managed to get all 3 points in this game.
Yeah, it's two teams really at the moment who are kind of a bit up and down in form. They don't really have any consistency about them. They'll maybe put 2 or 3 games together where they'll get a draw and a win and a draw, and then they'll go and lose in a pretty disappointing fashion. And that's what Gateshead have gone and done. They took an early lead 3 minutes in, but only took 2 minutes for Aldershot to come back. And then from that point onwards, it seems kind of Aldershot were quite comfortable with it. Was a bit of an anomalous game in the way that there was quite a large stoppage in the first half. It may have taken a bit of sting out of the match, but nonetheless, it's a big result for Aldershot. I do think they'll be safe come the end of the season, Aldershot, but there have been occasions this season where they've really flirted with the idea of that relegation, that final relegation spot. I think there was even one week where they did drop into it. But yeah, if they can pick up results like this throughout the rest of the season, I'm sure they'll be safe. But on Gateshead, I feel like we spoke about again before how they kind of feel like they may end up just kind of scraping that playoff spot. Where you look at them a few months ago, you think they'd be finishing that top 7 with quite a lot of conviction. But there does just seem, since Magni's come in, it does seem like there's just this bit of inconsistency about them, and the football doesn't seem as fluid. And as we mentioned, there has been that whole, they got picked apart in January for probably the 3rd time in 3 years. But I don't think they've recovered as well as they have in previous years this January. And I think that's showing in the performance levels. And I think, they are probably not the team they were at the start of the season. And, results like this have shown that.
Yeah, 100%. They sit 4th at the moment, yet Halifax have a game in hand on them. If Halifax actually win that game in hand, they'll actually go above Oldham and Gateshead by 2 points as well, above Gateshead. Altrincham as well, it's in their hands as well, I believe, to actually overtake Gateshead. So at the moment, it's actually technically not in Gateshead's hands, I believe, to actually finish inside the playoffs if Rochdale win those games. Of course, it's a big if at the moment. It probably wouldn't happen because you'd expect Rochdale, Altrincham and Halifax all to have a slip-up with their games in hand, or at least one of those two. But if Gateshead carry on how they are doing at the moment, they will soon, fall out of the playoff spots. And I have a lot of sympathy for Gateshead, not just in terms of the managerial change, not just in terms of January, but you look at recently as well, the amount of injuries that they've had to that side, particularly with the way they play as well. It must be very hard to bring players in that have to replace those, because it's such a demanding style and quite a difficult style to be involved in it if you're not up to scratch, if that makes sense. They like to keep the ball. It's a very demanding type of style. It's possession based, but you've got to be quite technically good to fit into that style, and every single player's got to understand their role. And when you're swapping the team every single week, it's going to have a detrimental effect on that style and being able to play such a smooth style of football. And I think that's something that has certainly been found out in recent weeks. Dropping points to Eastleigh, dropping points to Fylde, then having back-to-back defeats to a Rochdale side who weren't in the best of form prior to that game, and then obviously Aldershot as well. I suppose for Gateshead, it's a case of just getting over the line now and hoping the best for the playoffs. But for me, even if they do scrape into the playoffs this season, which I think they probably will just about, I genuinely can't see them doing anything inside these playoff spots, if I'm being totally honest. But no, for Aldershot, I think they're well and truly on their way to safety now. They've been a little bit unfortunate, I think, with how results have. Games have fallen to them. They've had a lot of postponements, which has probably put them in a position that they shouldn't actually be in, if that makes sense. A false position, that's probably a better way of describing it. Of course, currently sit 18th. Yeah, if they win those games in hand, they could be looking like they're going into higher mid-table. So for me personally, I'd expect Aldershot to not be involved in the relegation battle towards the final games of the season. And it's certainly a big win for them. Of course, 3 wins at home in the last 4, actually unbeaten in all those as well. And they managed to put 3 goals past 3 of the 4 sides. Ironically, the only side they couldn't really batter was actually Dagenham, which is quite a surprise, but just shows how unpredictable this league can be. Moving on to the next game, then, of course, your side managed to get in a point away at Boston. I suppose for Woking, I'd say it's probably a fair result at the point, but I suppose when you're so close once again to claiming all 3, it must be disappointing. Of course, that game finished 2-2, yet Woking were 2-1 up until the 90+5 minutes, I believe.
Yeah, it's a game where both teams come away disappointed, really, because Boston throughout the 90 minutes were the better side. But Woking, if you're a goal up with a minute to go, you would expect to hold on to that lead. So it's one that maybe doesn't. Everyone kind of came away a bit disappointed. But I was impressed by Boston. They knocked the ball around quite well, and they've got Coughlin's got them. He's got them. Well structured, and he's got them. It's hard to explain really with it because it was weird because they weren't really the side that I'd expected to see from them, especially seeing them earlier in the season. They did look like a side who are really, really up for the fight, and they looked like they knocked the ball around well. They've got a long throw in on them now with Brad Nicholson in there, and that was dangerous. That was where the equaliser came from. Going off that 90 minutes alone, I think they're going to put up quite a good fight in terms of survival. They've got some important games coming up, a few games in hand, and if they can go and pick up results there, then suddenly it looks, it looks a bit more positive for them. But from a Woking perspective, I'm not too disappointed with a draw. We have an absolute nightmare of injuries at the moment. I'd say 6 out of 8 of our current injuries are probably starting our strongest lineup. To bring 5 to the bench with 1 central midfielder, a defensive midfielder, 2 fullbacks, and a goalkeeper. Once we were up against it, it was probably tough to come back from there. But hopefully with a few bodies back soon, maybe some recruitment, we can kick on. And we've got a big game against Barnet on Saturday, which will certainly be interesting. But a quick word as well on Jay Rowe for Boston. He was, for me, that was absolutely exceptional for them. He stood out massively as a really, really crucial player for them. Got both goals too. And having a player like him could be a huge difference maker for Boston going forward in terms of surviving.
For me, the concern with Boston, I think throughout the season has been that they've been poor in both boxes. I think as a footballing side, they're pretty impressive. I think midfield, they're pretty strong for me personally. I think defensively that they've strengthened quite a lot as the season's gone on. I think they've been a lot more tighter than what they were in that first half of the season. So, but the main issue for me and the reason why I think that they're not going to be able to survive now is that they don't have a goal scorer. They don't score enough goals for me. So they've only scored 32 goals this season is quite a concern. You look at that Woking game, although they came back late on to get a point, they had 17 shots in that match to Woking 6. Being at home, I would have expected Boston with those amount of shots to really have gone on to win that game. Even look back at the Oldham game in the previous game, drawing 0-0. Yes, it probably looks like a good point. You look where Oldham are inside the playoffs, but the way Oldham are playing at the moment, they're there for the taking. And for me personally, I genuinely feel that was a game where they could have got all 3 points. And I think if they did have a goal scorer, Boston would be a lot higher up this division. I think they'd be well and truly probably more capable of surviving. Of course, it's not out of the question yet. Once again, a side that have probably it's been a little bit unkind, the fact that they've got a bunch of games in hand. So it might be little bit misleading how much of a gap there is between them and the likes of Maidenhead and Wealdstone at the moment, but yet they're still 23rd. And the main issue for me is that they don't have a goal scorer this season. And I think there'll be a lot of games where perhaps if they did have someone a little bit better going forward, they'd have been able to probably be well and truly involved in the relegation battle, I suppose. You look at sides around them, Wealdstone still struggling, yet they've got Alex Reid. We've seen the impact he's had there. If he'd have gone to, for example, Boston, perhaps it'd be vice versa between Boston and Wealdstone. Even look at the likes of, you could probably say Braintree as well. Kyle Lisby is capable of scoring a good number of goals. Fylde, they've got Nick Horton. Working in Effingham, I think if an Effingham was at Boston or Kyle Lisby or even like a Nick Horton perhaps was at Boston, I genuinely feel that Boston would be outside of the drop zone at the moment. But when you don't have a particularly strong goal scorer, for me, that seems to be why Boston are struggling compared to other sides around them. Yes, you've got Hazel going forward, but to have only scored 10 goals for them and meant to be their main goal threat, for me personally, it's not good enough. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I do agree with that. They do have a few, talented players in there in the squad. The likes of James Gale, Jacob Hazel. He's been a bit hot and cold this season at times, albeit he has scored a few crucial goals. Jimmy Knowles, he's not set the world alight as much as they thought maybe he would on his return. But I think that's more to do with the fact that he worked off Kelsey Mooney so well last season in the National League North. Not having him there now, it kind of makes a significant difference to his game as well. But yeah, I do agree with that. I think they don't really have a standout star that's gonna go and take the game by the scruff of the neck and actually and make a moment of magic. Jay Rowe did that at the weekend, and I was absolutely amazed. But there's only so much impact a right back can have on the game in terms of picking up the 3 points. So yeah, I do agree with that, and I think they probably are short of one real talisman that can kick them off.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And of course, moving on to the next game, Eastleigh won, Hartlepool won. We spoke about Hartlepool. I think they're well and truly now out of the playoff picture. I don't think they have anything to play for now, which is a massive disappointment, I have to say, from Hartlepool. I had quite high hopes for them at the start of the season. As for Eastleigh, maybe a disappointing result, the fact that you slipped up against Hartlepool, particularly being at home, because Eastleigh have been so strong at home this season. But they did come from 1-0 down, and Tyree Shade obviously getting them back into the game. And to be 1-1 at half time, you'd have liked to have thought that they'd maybe be able to go on to win that game.
Yeah, I think it's probably similarly to the Woking game, really. A match where both teams come away disappointed. They've probably, Hartlepool's may have been gone before, but they've probably both killed their playoff hopes here with this match, in my opinion. These are the kind of games, if you do want to finish in that top 7, you've got to go and win. But from an Eastleigh perspective, to be playing a Hartlepool team who are, they're not in the best form, and to be playing them at home, you probably would be hoping for a better result than a draw. Reyes Cleary for Hartlepool's gone and put them ahead early, but he's been a pretty good signing for them. But also his signing, as well as Sam Collyer, they confused me a little bit in the way that, they were screaming out for some pace, Hartlepool, for a while, out in wide areas. And then the second they both get signed, Limbrick chooses to kind of change the formation completely to having wing backs rather than wingers. And then instantly you've got two really good players there that you're not going to get the best out of. Hartlepool, as I've said, they're a team. I think they just need to see it out to the end of the season. Now they've got a technical manager who likes to play possession style football, that has inherited a team of bruisers and hard tacklers and hard and engines and runners. It's a combination that doesn't work, and it does raise the question as to why Limbrick was suddenly given that coaching role and that main leading role just a few months ago of the season. I feel like it's probably hindered Hartlepool more than it's helped them. Whereas with Eastleigh, Tyree Shade again, stealing the show for them. He's been absolutely exceptional for them. I believe that's his 10th goal of the season now, and that takes him to 17 goals and assists overall. We were talking a second ago about Boston lacking a talisman and someone who's going to take the game by the scruff of the neck and go and win a game single-handedly for a team. And Tyree Shade is that for Eastleigh. He's gone and got that equaliser for them, and he's been a huge player for them. And similarly to likes of Lisby, I'm sure that there'll be EFL teams sniffing around him this season because he's really made a name for himself this year.
It is still doable for Eastleigh to get inside the playoffs. They sit 9th at the moment, 4 points off the playoffs, yet they have played more games than Rochdale, Altrincham, Halifax, all above them. They've all got games in hands on them. Rochdale 2, Rochdale 4, I should say, Altrincham 2 and Halifax 1 as well. So it's going to be difficult for Eastleigh to finish inside the playoffs now with just 10 games to go left for them. They've got some really tough fixtures as well. And for me personally, you look recently, I just feel, although maybe they've got a bit of momentum together, consistency's been an issue throughout the season. And I just don't think they're capable of finishing inside the playoffs over those sides above them, because Halifax and Altrincham, I know Altrincham lost at the weekend, but those two at the moment overall are on great form. And, when they do get a defeat every so often, they always seem to bounce back, where Eastleigh, they have a defeat and then they seem to go on a bit of a null and go on a bad run of form. And for me personally, I just don't see Eastleigh really troubling the top 7 perhaps at the moment. But of course, still 10 games to go, still 30 points to play for them. They're probably going to need to get at least 20 points to finish inside the playoffs this season in those final 10 games. And I just don't feel Eastleigh are capable of averaging 2 points a game. We spoke about Hartlepool. I think the only thing that maybe to alert people of is the fact that the actual squad has been told, and this is according to Jeff Stelling, he's actually come out and said the squad have been told that they won't be being paid as much next season. They're going to have a cut on their wages. And in the final 10 games of the season, it's not going to give you much motivation, is it, to really kind of put a push together and finish the season strongly, is it?
No, yeah, that's I hadn't seen that, but that is that's a weird thing to tell the team with a few games left of the season. That's a real motivation killer, and to be fair, it does make a lot more sense now you say that, because you are seeing a big drop in form and they don't seem like they're as up for it anymore. I think it's Hartlepool's season's kind of just petered out now. It's a shame really, because I feel like that team does have a hell of a lot more potential than the league position suggests. The likes of Adam Campbell coming in, Dessa Rouvaway at the club. Those are two very significant attacking players. There's a very strong core of a squad there that doesn't seem to be being utilised very well, and it's going to end up with them being in the National League again next season. They do. It is a really weird situation for them to be in, because there's so much uncertainty around the club at the moment. At the moment, Limbrick's not even contracted till next season. They could up and tell him to leave in pre-season. Suddenly they're exactly where they were this summer, managerless going into pre-season. So I feel like the club just as a whole at the moment is lacking a lot of stability. I feel like you need to build on stable ground if you want to try and get back out of this league. And at the moment, it's just something that Hartlepool don't have, and you can see that in the results, you can see that in the performance, you can see that in the inconsistencies. That's what's going to hold them back for the foreseeable unless something changes.
Moving on to the next game, Halifax 1, Yeovil 0. back-to-back home wins now for Halifax inside a week, defeating Forest Green Rovers and then playing again on Saturday and defeating Yeovil. 2 huge wins for Halifax at the moment. We've spoke about them now that they're comfortably inside the playoffs, and it is actually in their hands to get as far as 4th at the moment.
Yeah, Halifax are absolutely flying at the moment, and they are a team, as we mentioned quite a lot about how under the radar they kind of go. They overperform massively, but they're just so steady in the way they do it and consistent. They don't get as much of the spotlight as maybe they deserve. It's a hard-working team of gritty players. Each week, they go out and they know their jobs, they know what they need to do, and they go out and do it. And it's a professional win against a really hard to break down Yeovil team at times. Will Smith is out for the season now, I believe, as well. That's a bit of a blow for them. Scott High as well, I believe he's out for the foreseeable too. But the recruitment, to bring in Josh Emmanuel, I feel like that's a really tidy bit of business. There's a lot of EFL experience there, and the kind of experience that will be crucial going into this kind of stage of the season. And I've spoke about on Twitter actually about how good of a signing I think Lewis Lee is for them. He played against us in 2 years ago in the playoffs, I believe. No, that was Ryan Sturck. Sorry, no, I saw him play last year for Bromley last year against Woking, and I thought he absolutely ran the show. He just sits in front of that defence and just dictates the play. He controls the tempo, distributes to the creative players, and let them do the tricky work in the attacking third. And I think that also complements the likes of Jack Evans really well. He's a bit more of a workhorse in midfield. The balance in he's a brilliant player, Evans, and the balance in that squad. I feel like it, regardless of the budget, it really highlights how good of a season Halifax are having. On Yeovil though, another team that are a little bit injury ridden. They've added the likes of Marcel Lavinia and Frankie Terry this week. But it sums up Yeovil's season really, and it's 2 absolute, polar opposites really, where Halifax have got that stability and that consistency. Yeovil have found that inconsistency throughout the whole season. They've basically got a complete new squad to what they started with. Again, you can see that in the way that the games play out for them, and you can see that in the way that their results are showing. They do just look inconsistent. So but they also are a side capable of coming out, and they are able to punish you. Frank Noogle's in good form at the moment. Kyrell Wilson looks a tidy little winger. So it's a good result for Halifax, and it really, I feel like it's a significant one because it's kind of propelled them further into that playoffs than they've been all season. And now suddenly realizing, well, okay, Halifax are they're not messing around this season. They're not there just to make up numbers, and they're really going to give promotion a go this season.
On the field, I don't think there's a better run club in this division. On the field, when I say that, with the recruitment has been spot on this season. I think overall Halifax's recruitment ever since Wild came into the side, which was about 6 years ago, and Millington was his assistant at the time, I think it's always been pretty good. But this season, just a completely different level. We've got a bottom 6 budget, and some of the players that we've managed to recruit have just been phenomenal. And, I reckon over half this squad in a few years' time will be playing in the Football League, if that's with Halifax or with another club. Because the fact that we've brought Scott High in, he was actually a replacement himself. He was there to replace Kane Thompson-Sommers, who we lost after a month into the season, which was quite a big blow on paper at the time. Scott High perfectly replaced him. Yet he's been now injured, and I don't think since he got injured away at York, I don't particularly think we've missed him. We've brought in players to replace him. I don't think we've even seen Lewis Lee particularly play much yet, and everyone's raving about him, and I'm sure he'll be a great player for us. But other players have stepped up. Jenkins been a bit of a fringe player this season, yet he's come into the side and replaced him perfectly. Jack Evans is a player for me that I think every side in this division would love a Jack Evans in the team. He puts 100% into every single game. He just gets better and better. And, next season, if it's with Halifax or with another team, he surely will be in the Football League, because I'd go as far to say he's the best midfielder I've seen in this division. He's so underrated as a player, and I think he makes any midfield look good, if I'm being honest. And yeah, it's really positive times because, once again, losing Will Smith, we've managed to replace him. Festus Harper's come in. he's been there a few years now, had a few injury problems. He's come in, had an excellent game against Yeovil. Capello got on the score sheet. You can probably tell in the way that I'm speaking, I'm very optimistic at the moment. And it really is hard to throw away now to not finish inside the playoffs. And maybe I'm giving it the kiss of death here, but I can't see why we wouldn't finish inside the playoffs at the moment with the remaining fixtures, the way we're playing. We've got a half decent, for a side like Halifax, we've got a good amount of squad depth as well. And there's only one or two players where I think if they got injured, I think it would have a particular detrimental effect on the team overall. And, I think in most positions we're capable of replacing those. And, to defeat Forest Green, that'll have taken a lot out of them. It was a tiring game. Forest Green kept a lot of the ball. They had to defend very well. But to then play against a Yeovil side that were probably desperate to bounce back after being thumped in midweek and managing to kind of win that game without going into second gear, for me personally, it's a sign of a dark horse inside these playoffs. And I'm really confident going into the final 10 games of the season. As for Yeovil, not an awful side at all. Like I said, I think mid-table for them this season is probably a fair assessment of where they should finish. They've been a bit unlucky with injuries. But like I said, I think Cooper has to take a lot of credit. And I think Yeovil overall, as a club, have to take a lot of credit, considering it's the first season inside the National League. I think they've done well to be probably going to finish mid-table. But yeah, for me, as you can tell, I'm really happy with how Halifax is performing at the moment. And, when we're making additions like Emmanuel and Lee, it's only going to strengthen us even more.
No, absolutely. I think, as a Halifax fan, I feel like rightfully so, you should be in, the highest of spirits, really. The consistency is just, it's superb. And at the end of the day, it's what you need if you want to, make a name for yourself in this division. You want to be in that top 7. And, there have been periods this season where there has been, a few shaky moments, but, they're very short-lived. There's not, nothing, no bad feeling really lingers around the club of Halifax. They kind of, they know that, the budget's not too big, and, it's punching above their weight, but they do it so well. And, you overcome adversity as a team so efficiently. It is just something you have to admire, really. As for Yeovil, it's been a weird season for them. I do think, they maybe at the start of the seasons were a bit of a victim of their own success, having such a strong start. I think it probably set an unrealistic expectation for a few fans who maybe did think they could compete for that top 7. But yeah, no, I do agree. I do think mid-table for Yeovil is probably about where they are. And, with the stature of the club and maybe the money that they have spent, you could argue that maybe they would have liked to be a bit higher. But I do think as a newly promoted team, I think, comfortably surviving this division first season back up is more than a big enough achievement for your first year back at this level.
Few young players in that squad as well. It seemed quite raw, but it also felt like they had quite a lot of potential. Of course, a few on loan as well. Kywell Wilson, for me, was a standout for Yeovil, caused our defence quite a lot of issues, particularly in the first half. There's a number of players in that side that I think will only get better. Labiner, he looked pretty good at right back for Yeovil as well on Saturday. So, yeah, overall for me, I don't think Yeovil fans can particularly complain too much. Just feel a little negative there overall, and I think, like you've mentioned, it's because of that strong first half of the season, and perhaps they haven't really invested when maybe they should have midway through the season to really push on and maintain being involved in a playoff charge. But for me personally, I just think it's a bit of an unrealistic expectation for your first season back in the National League, and I think maybe next year is where they'd like to push on even more. But yeah, just finally on my side, Halifax, I think it'll take a lot for us to not finish inside the playoffs this season now. I'm really confident and optimistic. The fixtures towards the end of the season are pretty kind to us as well. And, the sides above us are actually, we're outperforming those. If you look in the form table, I think we're second or third at the moment. So for me, I don't see why Halifax can't finish inside the playoffs this season. And I think there could be a dark horse inside the playoffs as well. And, you look at us as well, we've adapted as the season's gone on. Start the season, we seem to struggle to score goals, defensively strong, relied on specific individuals as such, like Oliver Bori, to get our goals and get us further up the field. Whereas now we've got a full-on structure. Midfield's really strong. Defence is really strong. The attack's a lot more balanced now. We've got the likes of Thomas and Emerson, 2 young forwards that I think will both be playing in the Football League in the future. And, you know, you look at previous years under Millington, we haven't really offered anything going forward. We've relied on one individual like Millie Alley. Whereas now we've got a number of players that can score goals. So I think Halifax will finish inside the playoffs, and I don't think there's any reason for them not to at the moment. But of course, that can quickly change. Moving on to the next game then now. Maidenhead 0, Sutton 1. Disappointing result for Maidenhead. Perhaps they could have seen this as a bit of a winnable game to help propel them outside of the drop zone. As for Sutton, it's a good win for them, I suppose. Not too much to play for, though, I guess.
Yeah, it's for Sutton. It's, you know, it's a bit of a nothing result, really. You know, happy with 3 points. I don't think they're going to get playoffs. I don't think they're going to be in threat of relegation. But for Maidenhead, I'm still eagerly waiting for that moment where they, you know, they make that little push out of the relegation zone that they seem to do every year. They are, you know, serial escapists. They do it every single time. But, you know, they're cutting it thin at the moment. They're cutting it really thin. You know, you look at the stats of the game, they do just seem a little bit blunt. You know, 5 shots throughout the match, you know, with only 1 shot on target. You know, it's a 50-50 possession game. It was quite a gritty match with very physical teams going at it. But, you know, like you said, it's a game where Maidenhead should be hoping to get maybe at least a point for, especially at home as well. You know, it's a fortress usually, that ground. But it just seems to have lost its touch this season a little bit. You know, teams in previous years, no matter how well Maidenhead are doing, they fear going to that ground at York Road, because it's a staple of the division. You know, it's an old school ground. You know, stone stands and, you know, a proper, like I said, a staple of what this division can offer, from, you know, like the highs to the lows. And, you know, it just doesn't seem to be that kind of fortress that teams go to and really fear this year. I feel like that's really been a point for Maidenhead, which is, you know, cause them to struggle a bit more than they usually do. But yeah, it's getting, you know, a bit shaky for them. But I do still think they will have enough to stay up eventually. But if you ask me that question in a couple of weeks, that could very much change, because, you know, it is getting very tight for them now.
They've had 20 defeats this season. Only Ebbsfleet have had more defeats this season. And, you know, throughout the years when Maidenhead have been in this division, they've always been known as perhaps don't really offer too much going forward, you may say, and draw a lot of games. They're very good at grinding out results. Whereas this season, sides are going there and managing to just defeat them quite comfortably at times as well. To have 20 defeats in 36 games, for me, is quite a concern for Maidenhead compared to how they have been in previous years. And it's looking tough, because Fylde, Wealdstone are all capable of going on good runs of form like Maidenhead have done in previous years, and Maidenhead just seems to can't get a run at the moment. You know, at the moment, you look at their form, they've had no wins in 5, they've lost 4 of those games as well, conceding a fair amount of goals, which is unlike them compared to previous years. I am very concerned for Maidenhead. The only thing in Maidenhead's favour, perhaps, is if you look at the final end to the season, the final 4 games, you've got Woking at home, who probably, in my opinion, won't have anything to play for by then. You've then got Wealdstone away, which is a very winnable game away from home. You've got Ebbsfleet away, which is a side that's just gifting anyone points, to be honest, at the moment. And then you've got Boston at home, which you'd probably think that Boston will be relegated by that point as well, unless they really do turn it on at an average 2 points a game until the end of the season. So for me, the fixtures towards the end of the season are very kind to them. They've got Dagenham, Tamworth coming up as well. So, you know, that's the only thing in Maidenhead's favour at the moment. They've had to play a lot of tough sides. So maybe when the fixtures are a little bit more kinder to them, that's when they could potentially go on a good run of form. Moving on to the next game now, we've got Rochdale 4, Wealdstone 1. A bad result for Wealdstone. Suppose is there any shame in that, losing to Rochdale away from home?
Yeah, it's a tricky place to go to, especially as a part-time team. You know, it's a lot of travelling for them, but, you know, Rochdale, they seem to be finding their feet a little bit more since that result against Altrincham in the FA Trophy. I think most people probably expected them to go into, or they did go into that game as the underdogs on some really poor form, with Altrincham absolutely flying, but they ended up getting through. And they seem to have kicked on from that. The signing of Jay Bird seems to be quite a significant one for them. It seems to have given them a bit more of a presence up front, in where he may not be particularly, scoring for fun or setting up a load of goals. That presence he has, where he brings others into play and allows them to flourish. It's really, really, it's really improved them as a team. Whereas, Wealdstone, they've had a good little run of form recently. They're not going to win every game between now and the end of the season, and they are in a relegation scrap. But the manner in which they've gone and lost the game isn't a good one, and it's not one that you want to really see your team lose. Not really a manner you want to see your team losing. There does seem to be a bit, they seem a bit more structured now, Wealdstone. And I do think they are a team that will probably end up staying up. But the main takeaway from this, for me, this game as a whole, is that I do feel like Rochdale maybe are almost back in terms of finding that form. They had a bit of time out with not being able to play as much because of their pitch. But I feel like people have kind of pushed them to the side because of their poor run of form recently. But it's a bit of a statement result, that in the trophy match, suggesting that they aren't going to back down in terms of trying to make the top 7 this season.
We spoke about Rochdale's home games being crucial, and it's going to define the season whether they can make the most of those home games or not, because they've got a lot more home games than away games left to go because of the postponements. And you look recently, look at the last 3 games, including the FA Trophy, to beat Altrincham in the semi-final, to beat Gateshead in the league, and then to beat Wealdstone in such a fashion that they did. To me, suggests that, like you've mentioned, Rochdale are back, and they're going to put a case together to get inside the playoffs, because it's very easy, and you've got a lot of fixture congestion. You're having to play Saturday, Tuesday until the end of the season to fall away due to tiredness, particularly when you're playing on the same pitch that's going to get damaged because of the amount of times you're playing on it. But I think they've done very well to get maximum points out of the last 2 games. And Altrincham on Tuesday night, that's going to be a huge game for them. As for Wealdstone, I think they were just simply outclassed. They only had 2 shots in the whole 90 minutes compared to Rochdale's 16. You mentioned about Wealdstone having enough to stay up. They are capable of going on a good run of form. They've done it probably 3 times this season, where they've managed to pick up and go on a 5-game unbeaten run, you could say, or potentially even more. They've managed to win games on the bounce when they've needed to around them, and they have proven that when they need to, they will get the results and pull it out of the bag. Yet they are still in the drop zone at the moment. They've slipped back in, they're in 21st place. They're going to have to win that game in hand against Fylde if they want to survive. I've asked you before, Sam, bottom 4 them. We've spoke about, I think, all the sides involved in the relegation battle so far. So you're back in Maidenhead and Wealdstone to survive, who are currently both in the bottom 4. Who do you reckon is going to slip into that?
See, at the moment, I've got Ebbsfleet, Boston, Dagenham and Fylde in that bottom 4 at the moment for me. But as you mentioned just then, it very much highlights that this relegation scrap this year is absolutely brutal. Woking 1 loss in 13 games so far since Neil Ardley's come in. We're still not clear of that relegation fight. When you hear that kind of form, you think that's you would be well clear. And like you said, Wealdstone to go 5 games unbeaten, you think that take them out of that drop zone and maybe put them a little bit clear. They're still well and truly in it, just off of 1 loss. So it's one of those things that can very much change throughout throughout the remainder of the season. But And to be fair, I say throughout the remainder of the season, I feel like every single week we come onto this and we talk about something, in that relegate a new twist and turn that's completely changed the outlook on the division. But at this very moment, it will probably be different the next time we speak. But at the moment, for me, Fylde, Dagenham joining the bottom 2, I think, at the moment in that bottom 4 come the end of the season.
Moving on to the next game, then we've got Southend 2, Altrincham 1. Southend took a 2-goal early lead. I think it was always going to be hard when you go 2-0 down away from home to Southend to get back into the game. They've only conceded 40 goals all season, and most recently they're hardly conceding any goals at all. For Altrincham, I think they kind of lost the match when they went 2-0 down and made a case to get it back into the game. The goal that kind of made the game alive again was scored by Regan Linney. It was an excellent finish for anyone that wants to see kind of a goal of the game week. That would probably be the one. And from that angle, he smashed it into the top corner. It was an excellent goal. But no, as for Southend, it's another statement win for them. They're really becoming a dark horse side that could really put a case together to finish inside the playoffs this season. Oldham, Gateshead seem to be slipping up at the moment, and I think Southend is certainly ready to pounce for any side that does slip up for them to finish inside the playoffs this season, because they're one of the most informed sides in the division at the moment.
Yeah, they are lingering in and around there. Like I said, we've seen crazier things happen in this division. I think with Southend, I feel like one massive significant point that stands out for me is I do feel like they're a lot stronger as a side when they play a back four. They've kind of like jumped from playing a 3-5-2 to a 4-3-3 throughout the course of the season. I do think every single time they play a back four, they do seem a lot more, they seem a lot more of a threat. They've got, Bond playing in the middle of that front three. They play a bit more narrow. You get Kendall and Hopper playing off of him. Rather, not quite wingers, but more, just centre forwards playing off of maybe a target man. But they are a team that they do have, in terms of the quality in their squad, quite a lot of threats going forward. And they although they have struggled at times to score goals. And to be fair, come the end of the season, that might be what ends up costing in the playoffs. Just those games earlier in the season, where they do struggle to put the ball in the back of the net. They could do with a player like Regan Linney, who, moving on to him, absolutely exceptional player. It's an absolute cracking goal at the weekends. I've seen a few players. I've seen over the last month. I've seen a few teams with national league teams, fans suggesting try and make a statement signing, bringing in Regan Linney. That bloke's going to go to the EFL. There's no doubt in my mind. He's an absolute ruthless finisher. With maybe the exception of Ollie Pearce, he's probably this division's top centre forward. The link that he's got with Alex Newby at the moment this season has been absolutely exceptional. I believe it was Newby who set his goal up at the weekend too. I do feel like Altrincham, they've kind of maybe hit a little bit of a roadblock, to get knocked out of the FA Trophy. A loss here as well. It's maybe a couple stumbles that maybe people didn't expect. And I feel like it's also maybe coincided with the forced goalkeeper change. Caleb Anson came in on loan from Norwich, had a bit of a shaky start, so they brought in Rob Lainton, who's not seen the most too much football in recent years. But regardless of who they bring in, Ethan Ross is a top goalkeeper at this level, and he's going to be very hard to replace for the remainder of the season. And I think that's shown. I feel like they've looked a bit shakier at the back, Altrincham, in recent weeks. And it kind of signifies how important Ross is to their team. But, they're a team who are more than capable of bouncing back. I don't know who they've got next in their next fixture, but I'm sure they'll be looking. Tuesday. Oh, big game then. Very big game, Yeah, it's massive for Halifax, but it's having just been knocked out by Rochdale in the FA Trophy, they're going to want revenge, and it will be a statement going and picking up 3 points there. That's for sure.
I think this last week for Altrincham, it's been a difficult run of fixtures. To go to York, get all 3 points there, such a statement win for them. But it's going to take a lot out of you, particularly when you've got to travel all the way down to Southend. I don't know if they'd have stayed over the night before or how they travelled down, if they travelled down on the day. But Southend, for me, Wealdstone is a very difficult place to go. They don't lose many games at home this season, particularly, recently as well. They don't lose many games at home. So for me, that was always going to be a tough game for Altrincham. Suppose now Tuesday night's an even bigger game. They've just got to find a way to bounce back against Rochdale, because, if they lose that game, then Rochdale would go level on points with them, would actually go above them on goal difference. And Rochdale would have 2 games in hand as well. So Altrincham slips outside of the playoffs again, and it wouldn't be in their hands. Because Halifax, for me, they don't look like they're letting up at the moment. They'll be relying on them going on a bad run of form when they're actually in decent form and got a kind end to the season. They'd need Oldham and Gateshead to really carry on how they are doing. And for me, I'm not saying Oldham and Gates are going to have the prettiest ends to the season, but I'd like to think they'll be able to get the wins because of what they've done in that first half of the season, the wins that they need to finish inside of the playoffs. So I think Tuesday night for Altrincham could define Altringham's chances of making the playoffs this season. As for Southend, they're still hunting down a playoff spot. Consistency has always been an issue for them, and that might be their downfall. That first, I think, 3 quarters of the season, they've really been in mid-table for the majority of it. They're really going to need a good end to the season now. They're probably going to need to average 2 points a game if they're going to finish inside the playoffs this season, which I do think is doable from Southend. For me, if they did get in the playoffs, they'd be a side that I would not want to be facing. They've done the double over Halifax, but not only that, they've got a great record against sides inside the top 7 this season. So for me personally, yeah, they're a side that I'd be wanting to avoid, and I think any other side inside the playoffs would be wanting to avoid, particularly as they'd see it as a free hit as well if they finished inside the playoffs, if they managed to get there. Moving on to the next game now, Tamworth won, Oldham won. Winless in 7 now for Oldham. The pressure on Mickey Mellon is certainly heating up. I think over half of the fan base are now calling for his head and wanting to appoint someone else. But if you are going to appoint someone else, who are you going to bring in?
Yeah, it's a tricky situation for them to be in. If you asked me a few weeks ago of Oldham, I probably would have said, just stick it out, see what we'll see, to the end of the season. I personally do still think they should do that. But, I feel like 4th place was where they probably should be. But now they're slowly trickling away from that. And I feel like, that expectation of where they should be as a club, they're now not meeting it. To go winless in 7 at such a crucial period in the season, that's absolutely devastating for them, really. There's no wonder the fans are, in uproar really at the moment. I feel like a few people have called it earlier in the season that there was probably an expectation that they might end up crumbling. That's kind of coming to light now, and it's been a bit of a it's been a really tough spell for them. And to play a team like Tamworth, who are all about being really gritty and grinding out results, when you're in desperate need to pick up 3 points and you're not in good form, they're probably one of the last sides you want to play. They're going to come to the ground, or you're going to go to them, and they're going to make it extremely hard for you to get playing. They're going to, be physical. They're going to, bully you around the pitch, and that's pretty much what happened. They ended up making it a scrap, and it wasn't a pretty game of football, that's for sure. But it's a result that Tamworth will probably be more happier for than Oldham were. And just a quick word on Ronan Maher for Tamworth. He's come on loan to them for his second spell. And he's actually a player that I've wanted to highlight for a while now. I do think he's a player with a really big future for me. He's got 2 goals, 2 assists in his 10 games for them now, and he looks really sharp. When he came to Woking the other week as well with Tamworth, he looked proper on it. He's beating his man. He's very confident on the ball, very slick ball carrier who can also play in the 10. Those kind of players and that kind of recruitment that Tamworth have. That's why they are sitting 11th in the league after being, one of the favourites to get relegated this season. They are so smart in the business that they do and so smart in the way that they play. Looking back at it, it's probably not surprised they are where they are. But from an Oldham perspective, it's not good viewing at the moment. And there's some decisions that probably have to be made come the end of the season if they really want to kick on next season. And especially in the season next year where they probably should be competing for the title. Some important decisions are going to have to be made, that's for sure.
Speaking of standouts for Tamworth, of course, the top goal scorer this season, I believe, for Tamworth is Nathan Tishunka. Oh, no, it's Dan Creaney, but then it is followed by Nathan Tishunka. Of course, he's a standout for me. Whenever I see him play, I think he offers them something a little bit different. He's got a bit of flair. To be honest, I think it's exactly what an Oldham need at the moment. A bit of power, a bit of flair as well alongside that. Because, you look at Oldham, for me personally, they don't have any pace in that side. I know they loaned out, I can't pronounce his name. I don't think anyone can. If you want to give it a go, Sam, you can.
I think it's a Chegbalan.
A Chegbalan.
Yeah. Most people just call him Jez, I think. But
Yeah, we'll say Jez then. But of course,
Yeah.
he will loan out from Oldham to Eastleigh. He offers a lot of flair and probably doesn't have too much end product, but he's certainly got pace. They've had to recall him from Eastleigh. And you look at that side, it just lacks so much pace. There's a lot of experience in the side, but what comes with experience is probably older players that don't particularly have too much pace. And yeah, it's just a lot weaker than that first half of the season, isn't it? The span of the team's just gone. Manny Mum's out injured. Clucas has left. Stones has obviously moved on since. It's just a lot weaker side. Even like some Kane Dummins, who's at the side, he offered something a little bit different. He had abundance of quality and ability and flair as well, when I say that. And, he's obviously not with the side anymore. It's just a really poor side, if I'm being honest, compared to that first half of the season. And it certainly wouldn't be good enough for the playoffs if you were to start the season now, for me personally. And I think it's going to be a long end to the season for Oldham, but you'd like to think that they can hopefully clinch on to a playoff spot. But I have to say, if they do get inside the playoffs this season, like Gateshead, I can't really see them doing anything inside the playoffs. If I'm being honest, I don't think either of those sides would get in at this point now. If we were to start the season, if there were only 10 games left, and there were 7 sides who were going to get inside the playoffs this season, I don't think Oldham and Gateshead would get in, particularly Oldham, I should say. But yeah, it's just a really bad result for them. Winless in 7. They failed to score in 4 of those 7 games as well. They're clearly lacking goals. I think they're lacking a lot of things at the moment. And I know fans are calling for Mellon's head. Yes, something needs to change, but it doesn't feel like it's going to change anytime soon. But I think the players have to take a lot of responsibility. And I think, to be fair, there's got to be a lot of sympathy in a way with the players that they've lost. You've lost your spine in your team. A lot of sides are going to struggle with that. But I suppose when you look at Halifax and Gateshead, who've lost players throughout the season due to injury and players moving on, you see now they've been able to replace players compared to Oldham, with 2 sides who've got a lot, weaker budgets than them. Oldham have kind of got to look at themselves in a little bit of shame, I suppose. The fact that Halifax, Oliver Ball is gone. Got a number of injuries. Scott High's out for the season. That's like your Clucas, who was out injured. You've then obviously got Will Smith, probably one of the best centre halves in this division, out injured. That's like Manny Mum. Yet we've managed to be able to adapt, bring in new players who fit the bill perfectly on a lot lower budget. So for me personally, I think Oldham probably need to look at the recruitment overall. And I don't think they actually recruited enough depth in the summer. Yeah, I'm sure we'll speak a bit more on Mickey Mellon and a bit more on that in a future podcast, because I know that's something I really want to talk a little bit about in a little bit more depth. But we're going to move on to the final game now. 2nd versus 3rd it was. This game needed a winner to keep the title race alive for me personally, and it was a draw. York won, Forest Green won.
Yeah, it's a significant game in terms of the title race, and out of the 2 teams that played in the match, I think neither of them would benefit really. A draw is probably the worst outcome for both of these sides, because it pretty much just puts them, more so on the back foot than they ever were. But yeah, it's a bit weird for York. They have, they've slipped up on a few occasions recently, and it's hard to really pinpoint what that kind of issue is. Whether they've maybe been found out a bit tactically, or
they played well in the
run out of steam. Yeah, they performed.
Like they were the better side, I thought, but
they've
been in it, so it's difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they put in a good performance, but it just seems like the results aren't, lining up with performances that like they were earlier in the season. So it's a weird one, really. But when you compare them, I mentioned this to somebody earlier. I said when you compare them to the situation that York are in comparison to Barnet, you're always going to get stick for bottling it. But the reality is, Barnet are probably in their 3rd season competing at the top of the division. They're a very well structured and a strong team that's been built over the course of a few seasons. York are probably about 2 years behind Barnet in terms of building a squad and getting to that position in which they are capable of winning a title. Do I think in another season, if it played out differently, they maybe could have gone and won the league this year? Absolutely. But I don't think there's particularly any shame in losing it. And I don't think York fans will particularly, lose too much sleep over it either. It's that they've still got a more than good enough chance of going up through the playoffs. And I feel like they are probably a side that I'd probably back in those kind of matches. You know, controlling possession, that relentless attacking play style, right at the back end of the season when you are, you know, playing these extra games, when you're tired, you know, going through extra time periods if they have to, playing that relentless style. You know, that's going to absolutely kill opposition. So, you know, I feel like now for York, it probably is just a matter of you know, trying to secure that second place and making sure, you know, I don't remotely think anything suggests this will happen, but, you know, making sure that they, you know, stay in that top 3 come the end of the season to make sure that they just make the playoffs as easy as possible for themselves. And on Forest Green, similar for them really. You know, the results this season, they've kind of just dropped off at the wrong time for them as well. The only difference is I feel like the performance levels have also dropped off for Forest Green too. There were periods earlier in the season where you looked at them and thought, yeah, wow, they're a team that are performing really well. They're going to go and compete. But where York are maybe dropping points, but performing well, Forest Green feel like they're maybe dropping points in matches where they deserve to drop points. And, you know, like I said, York performed pretty well at the weekend. I felt if any team was going to go and win it, it probably would have been York. You know, and that's the difference really. And I think that's probably why Forest Green will end up finishing behind both York and Barnet. But overall, it's a match that only really benefits Barnet, if I'm being totally honest. You know, they've gone more points clear of both of the teams that are trying to chase them down. And I think that's probably a significant one in terms of seeing Barnet lift the trophy at the end of the season.
I hate this term when people are saying that York have actually bottled it. I actually think they've been outclassed by Barnet. I think Barnet have just got stronger. I don't think it's a case of York have fallen off. I don't think that at all. If you actually look at York's fixtures recently, right, they've lost to Barnet. Barnet were a lot better side in that match. They outclassed them, if I'm being honest. You could say maybe against Halifax, giving Halifax a 2-goal early lead, you could say that could be a sign of potentially bottling it. But yet they've bounced back against Maidenhead away, Hartlepool away. Yes, a defeat to Oldham. Maybe you could class that as well. But for me, I think Barnet just got a lot stronger as the season's gone on. They don't concede any goals at all, whilst they're also scoring a lot of goals as well. You spoke about Barnet's project. They've been further into that project than I think York are. And I 100% agree. I think Barnet are by far the best side in this division, but it's took a number of years to build this squad together that's going to be capable of going on to win the league. And I just don't think there's any side that's really capable of being able to compete with them. You look at the lack of goals they're conceding, whilst also scoring at a large amount as well. They're just a different animal. I'd actually say, I don't mean across the season, but I would say recently in this final third of the season or so, I genuinely feel this is the best National League side we've seen in a long time. Everyone's going to go, well, what about Wrexham, Notts County? I'm on about the final third of the season. If you actually watch Barnet play, some of the football that they play, they'd be able to comfortably survive in League One. And I'm not even over-exaggerating when I say that. Their recruitment has been phenomenal. Yes, they have a budget, but they don't have a budget anywhere as big as some of the sides around them. I think the recruitment's been so clever. The likes of Ryan Glover, probably a bit of a player that was probably one of Aldershot's better players, but you'd have never seen him as a standout player in this division. They've created him into a really, really good footballer. Ken Lock, they've spotted him from Ebbsfleet, had a great year last year at Ebbsfleet. He's moved on. We've seen how much of a detrimental effect that's had on Ebbsfleet since he's left the side. It's just a great side overall. For me, this Barnet side, it's one of the best that I think we've seen in this division. So, yeah, I just think they're going to go on to win the league, and there's certainly nothing stopping them now. And like you've said, I don't think there's any shame in York not winning this league this season, because I just think Barnet are a better side. If York had started losing to sides towards the bottom, then perhaps you could say, yeah, they've bottled it because they should be winning those games. But losing to Barnet, and even potentially losing to Oldham, they probably were the favourites going into that. But, you know, they're a side that's inside the playoffs themselves. I think you have to give Oldham a lot of respect to be able to win that game too. Maybe if there was a side, I think, that's bottled it in terms of this title race, I'd have to go for Forest Green with their results and seeing the games that they've slipped up against. Losing to Halifax midweek away from home, dropping points against Woking, dropping points against Ebbsfleet, losing to Braintree. For me personally, that's a sign of a side that's bottling it. But they've just done that, I think, what a lot of people thought they would do. They've had injuries, it's clearly affected them. So they've drifted away from the title race now. And whilst Forest Green have probably got weaker, I think Barnet have just got a lot stronger, and York just haven't been able to compete with that. And I do think it's anyone's game in the playoffs. But I think Barnet are going to go on to win this league quite comfortably. And it certainly wasn't looking like that at one point. But Sam, anything to finally add before we bring things to a close?
Well, yeah, I think, like you said, Barnet are, I think they'll be the title holders come the end of the season. Like you said, I completely agree with what you say. That I don't think they've bottled it at all. I think it's just Barnet are just a completely different animal this season. You look at these kind of games after making a big statement win against York. You feel all right now. The pressure's on Barnet. They've got to keep maintaining these results, and to go out and beat teams like Rochdale 5-0 and stuff like that. That is just, it's unbelievable, really. 22, 23 games unbeaten now, I think it is. And you mentioned Ryan Glover. He was a gamble, really, for them because they did have to pay for him. Being under 21 years old, Aldershot offered him a deal, so you have to pay a compensation fee to Aldershot. And I think that's one of the reasons that a few National League teams wanted Ryan Glover, I believe. But they held back from maybe bringing him in based off that compensation fee, looking at it, is he going to be worth it? But the way Barnet have brought him in, developed him, it's made it worth every penny. Also, did we miss the
I feel like we might have done,
We missed the Solihull game, I think.
Yeah, we certainly have. Solihull versus Ebbsfleet. Probably gone in the wrong order. We were meant to finish. If the podcast went to plan, we'd have finished on that one. But yeah, we can quickly speak about that. A bit of a downer to finish the podcast, you could say. Both sides out of form at the moment. But I suppose Solihull have managed to get back to winning ways. Doesn't really matter who it was against. It doesn't really matter how they played. It's just the fact that they managed to get back to winning ways and pick up that first win. Of course, they won 2-1 versus Ebbsfleet.
Yeah, it's weird, really. It's a very strange game because it's hard. It's hard to really speak about Ebbsfleet at this stage of the season anymore. It's the same old every week. It feels like they kind of give themselves a little chance of getting back into a match every week, but they just don't seem to have that in their team to see out the result. And the form that Ebbsfleet are in, I wouldn't be looking at this match and this result as a Solihull fan and thinking, yeah, this is us back now. We're going to really kick on, because they still made it hard for themselves. They still let Ebbsfleet back into the game, and as a Solihull fan, that's not what you want to see. There's no conviction in that result. The one positive to take from it, Manny Duku, a new signing centre forward they've brought in, got a brace. That's going to fill him with some confidence. I was quite shocked to see him joining them. It did feel like a bit of a panic signing to me. One in which they felt like they had to just take a gamble because nothing else was going their way. But yeah, it's 3 points for Solihull, but I don't think it's a result that's going to fill them with much conviction. And same old of Ebbsfleet really now. They're going to go down. They're not really putting up much of a fight. And it's probably, they're probably edging closer and closer to being called probably the worst National League team that have, competed at this level since Dover. And I think, you can probably make an argument that they are, because they actually had quite a significant budget come the start of the season. Dover had, off the pitch financial problems. So, yeah, it's an absolute nightmare for Ebbsfleet. But Solihull, 3 points are 3 points, but I wouldn't be particularly, convinced with the 3 points they've picked up.
Yeah, I think for Solihull now, it's like a lot of sides. They just need to get to the end of the season. They're very close to I suppose, securing a spot in the National League next season. I'm acting as if that's an achievement. It certainly isn't for them, but I think it would be with how they've performed recently. 10 games left. They need probably about 4 points to mathematically stay up at the moment. They sit on 46 at the moment, which you'd like to think they'll be able to do. 4 points from the previous 2 games. I don't think that's too disappointing overall, considering how they were performing. And I just suppose now that you look at the next couple of games, Hartlepool, Yeovil, they're probably games where they could potentially get 1 or 2 wins out of those and really secure a spot next season, perhaps get a bit of momentum going into the final few games of the season. But yeah, playoffs are certainly gone. they should have enough to be able to survive now. I think those points that they got early on in the season will probably be enough for them to survive. So yeah, and that's finishing it then. The podcast, Solihull versus Ebbsfleet, 2-1 to Solihull Moors. A few Tuesday games that are obviously coming up. We're not doing our predictions for those games with them only being 4 fixtures. The fixtures as followed are Rochdale versus Altrincham. Of course, 2 sides fighting it out to finish inside the playoffs this season. Yeovil versus Boston. I think Yeovil, not too much to play for themselves. As for Boston, it might be last chance salute if they want to survive this season. They need to win this game. Oldham versus Eastleigh, which is also a very huge game in terms of making the playoffs. Eastleigh win this, they'll be well on track of potentially sneaking into the playoffs. As for Oldham, it's a massive opportunity for them to get back to winning ways, but they certainly need to in this match. And then, of course, the final game is Forest Green Rovers coming up against Sutton. Forest Green looking to secure a top 3 finish this season. As for Sutton, not particularly too much to play for apart from pride. And that wraps up all the National League games coming up midweek. I'll be back with Paul on Thursday night to preview. I believe it'll be game week 38 in the Vanarama National League, but it's certainly one I'll be looking forward to. Sam, once again, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure once again to be on the podcast.
Now, like always, it's always good to have you on. Also, remember to like and subscribe. Check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There's a link in the description. And also, if you'd like to become a channel member, it's just £2.99 a month. Thank you to everyone that's tuned in, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.